Here we are, the last session of day 2. Have you enjoyed yourself? Yes? Do you feel like this has been worth it? Mobile development is a very different thing, isn't it? It's a different thing than the website, the server-side web development you very well might be used to. I've been doing client-side development now for several years, and I have to say, it's very refreshing. It's made me very excited about my craft again. Not that I wasn't excited, but once you start understanding the benefits of doing server-side development, and you understand the benefits of doing client-side development, you have more tools in your tool belt. You have more patterns to choose from. You have more architectural styles to decide which one fits your problem space the best. So I've been getting lots of wonderful questions from folks over the breaks in between talks saying, should I use this, should I use that? And I am never going to tell you, you must do this, you must do that, because this is software development. So all I can do is give you possible solutions, but you are the one that needs to make the final decision as to whether this solution is appropriate for your particular problem. Yeah? Good. Well, as I said, my name is Scott Davis. I run a company called Thirsty Head. And it's interesting that I started doing client-side development back in 2005 when we started doing Google Maps work. Google Maps is a wonderful example of a client-side component. You say var map equals new map, and boom, everything else happens inside of that. So I had been doing this client-side development since 2005, but it's only within the last couple of years that we really began focusing on these kinds of things. Now, for those of you who were in my last talk on Backbone, that was a client-side MVC framework that was very component-oriented. This is a client-side JavaScript MVC framework, but it tends to be more page-centric. So I hope you enjoy this, because we are going to be focusing on mobile development in here. And just a few of these slides are repeats from my keynote from yesterday, so I do apologize if you were there. But it's really important for us to understand why things like jQuery Mobile, why things like Backbone are so important for us to begin exploring and considering. This is a statistic based on United States smartphone usage. But over half of the cell phones in the United States at this point are smartphones. Now, that's across the entire population, over 50%. My mother-in-law, who is over 70 years old, just bought her first iPhone. So if my mother-in-law has a smartphone, that gives you an idea of how pervasive it is. But it's really interesting, because I've done some work for various universities. Yale University last year was one of them. What do you think the smartphone demographic is for incoming university freshmen? 100%. It's really interesting. When I went to university about 100 years ago, you would lug your computer along in a steamer trunk behind you. I remember my very first laptop, it had a monochrome screen. That gives you an idea of how old that was. But modern university students now, many of them are coming to university without a computer. It's because they just expect it. My high school back in Omaha, Nebraska, is issuing all incoming freshmen MacBooks at the high school level. So students are just assuming that computers are going to be there, and if you don't get your own personal laptop, there are computer labs everywhere. So many university students are coming in saying, I don't need to bring a computer with me. Those are everywhere. But they all have smartphones. And that is how they want to register for classes. And that is how they want to check their grades. That is how they want to interact with their professors. That's how they want to recharge their food account for cafeteria services. So this is why Yale University brought me in. They said, look, our demographic has a market penetration of 100% for smart devices. It's not okay for a university to leave mobile out of the equation. So this is what's repeated from my keynote yesterday, but I still want to bring this up. I'm still stunned by these numbers. That Apple sold more mobile devices last year in 2011 than all computers since the beginning of the company. In 1 year, they sold more mobile devices than all computers previously in the history of that company. And if you look at this chart, I know it's very small and it's hard to see, but this is the 50 million mark right here, and it took them 20 years to sell 50 million desktop computers and laptops. It took them 4 years to sell 50 million iPods. It took them 3 years to sell 50 million iPhones. And it took them 1 year to sell 50 million tablets. This is a phenomenon that we cannot ignore. Over and over, you're going to see trend lines that go like this when it comes to mobile devices. That was an Apple-specific example, but in the year 2010, that was the first time in history where across the board, across all mobile providers, smartphones outsold computers. The first time in history. And again, if you look at those statistics, computer sales were up 5%. Smartphone sales were up nearly 90%. One more trend line for you right here, and then we'll get into the specifics of jQuery Mobile. That green bar, that fairly flat bar, is not the number of computers, that's web traffic coming from desktop computers. That's still going to be going up over the years. But that steeper line, that yellow line, is web traffic that's going to be coming from mobile devices. Morgan Stanley says these two lines are going to cross sometime in early 2014 or late 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a year from now that those two lines are going to cross. We really, as web developers, need to get comfortable with this idea of producing content that can be consumed on mobile devices. Because Google said this year, 1 billion people with a B are going to be accessing Google properties with mobile devices. And that's going to be the primary device they use to access these kinds of things. So I said this yesterday and I say it again today. It is professionally irresponsible, and I'm not chastising any of you. You're the good guys. You're here to software conference learning these kinds of things. But this is what I do as a consultant. When I come into a company and they say, oh, well, our website doesn't have to look good on an iPhone. We have an app for that. I said, well, what happens if someone pulls out their iPhone and types in your URL? Are you going to preclude them from doing that? Are you going to send shocks back in the phone so their thumbs get shocked? No. People are going to use mobile browsers to access your websites. It's up to you to decide if they have a good experience or a bad experience. And that leads us very nicely into jQuery Mobile. jQuery Mobile is a web framework that is optimized for smartphones and tablets. Now, many of you were in my Backbone talk earlier, so we can begin comparing and contrasting. Backbone, even as the name implies, is a skeletal framework. It gives you models, views, controllers, and a router, and that's it. Backbone has nothing at all to deal with look and feel issues. That was Backbone. jQuery Mobile, on the other hand, is going to give you a wonderful, rich set of widgets. jQuery Mobile is more focused on look and feel issues, whereas Backbone is more focused on backbone kind of issues. And so it's very common for people to begin mixing these two together. Now, I typically don't on my project because you go from a component-oriented mindset to a page-centric mindset, and sometimes these guys really do step on each other. For instance, jQuery Mobile handles routing and Backbone handles routing. So if you're trying to mix the two together, you say, well, who should win? Should it be a Backbone route or should it be a jQuery Mobile? And so I'm going to discuss them as two separate frameworks. I'm going to suggest you consider one or the other. But there are a lot of people out there who say we're going to use the two of these together. Yeah? All right. So jQuery Mobile 1.2.0 just recently came out, and they've announced support for a bunch of different platforms. You can see that you can run a jQuery mobile app on iOS and Android, and remember, those two platforms make up over 85% of all smartphones and tablets right there. When it comes to tablets, the iPad alone makes up 3/4 of the market. When it comes to smartphones, Android devices make up about 50% of the market, and Apple iOS iPhones make up another 1/3 to 1/4. So when jQuery Mobile says we've got support for iOS and Android, that's the vast majority of your market right there. But notice they do support BlackBerry. That brings about another 10% in. They do support But. They do support WebOS. They do support those various kinds of things. Now, a lot of people have been asking me, well, should we do native development or should we do web development? And right here at this screen is one particular answer. I'm never going to tell you you should never write your app in Objective-C. But what you have to realize, if you write it in Objective-C, that's only going to handle one of these platforms up on the screen. If you decide you want to be an Android developer and write it in Java, that's great. But that only covers one of these platforms up on the screen. Some of the things we saw coming out in BlackBerry 10 that RIM had, some of those are very interesting ideas, but if you do native development for a BlackBerry, the answer is in the question, isn't it? You just did a solution for one platform. So I'm never going to tell you that native development is wrong, but if you do want something that is write once, run anywhere, and my apologies to Sun and now Oracle, that's their catchphrase, and I've been a Java developer for years, and so I'm shamelessly steering their catchphrase and now beginning to use it for HTML5 because the browser is in fact the true write once, run anywhere platform across smartphones, tablets, desktop computers, and even smart computers. There are a number of different websites out there that are using this. And by the way, all of these are screen grabs from jQuery Mobile's homepage. So if you want more information on this, jQuery Mobile's homepage is a great place for you to start. And right up here, you'll see all those platforms. They even give you a template so you could begin dragging buttons onto the template and maps onto the template and things like that. And as you begin playing around with this, notice you've got a view source right there. Now, you wouldn't use this for professional development, but it's certainly a great way to get started with these kinds of things. And all this is right there on jQuery Mobile's homepage, including a list of folks that are using their app. OpenTable, IKEA, Khan Academy, Disney World, you might have heard of them, huh? SlideShare, all kinds of different companies, the Rugby World Cup, Stanford University. All of these different companies are using jQuery Mobile for their apps. But I can tell you that I know one more person that is using jQuery Mobile as well. This is a project I most recently rolled off of. I live in Denver, Colorado. Denver and Boulder are two cities that are about 30 minutes apart from each other. And there's a major highway that runs in between the two, US 36. And they're getting ready to expand this highway project. It's a $320 million project. And they said part of this project is we want to have a smartphone app for a road construction project. I said, sign me up. I'll do it. I would love to. And so if you go to yes, unfortunately I lost that battle. If you go to us36expresslanes.com, they couldn't find a longer domain name, which is really unfortunate. If you go to us36expresslanes.com, you're going to end up with a great example of a jQuery mobile application. And part of what you see there is there's a bit of a thermostat, green, yellow, red. Traffic is really good right now on US 36 because it is 4:55 in the morning in Denver, Colorado. So traffic is right on the money. You got nothing to worry about there. But we'll see, this is a jQuery mobile app, and if you wanted information about biking, you can click on your biking icon. If you wanted information on bus routes, you can click on the bus icon. And if you wanted to get a live view of this map, you not only have this map, but you can click on every one of these things. Let's see if all the way in India, yes. It's very dark right now, but this is a live traffic camera of traffic at 4 o'clock in the morning on US 36. That looks safe, doesn't it? Yeah. So all of this is an example of something that you can go out and play around with and see how that looks like. So let's begin. Let's take a look at what jQuery Mobile brings to the party. When we were talking about Backbone, I spent time talking about how it's component-oriented, not page-oriented. I talked about how it's asynchronous, not synchronous. Those kinds of things. jQuery Mobile is a page-centric app. I will be defining pages, but we already know that they aren't real pages. I'm not round-tripping to the server with individual HTTP gets. I'm going to be showing and hiding divs. But the way I show and hide divs is through non-intrusive semantic HTML5. Now that sounds really impressive, doesn't it? Yeah. If I walked up to a building and I saw one of these signs on it, what do you think is inside of that particular building? It's not hard, is it? This is what I mean by semantic, is that I've got a brick box out there, but when I slap a school sign on the outside, I say, oh, look, this is a school. If I slap a hotel sign on it, I say, oh, look, this is a hotel. This is exactly what we're going to be doing with jQuery Mobile. But instead of things like school and hotel and cafe, we're going to be saying things like page. This div has the role of a page. And then inside of that page div, I have divs that have a role of header, role of content, role of footer, role of list, role of button, roll, all these kinds of things. So when a lot of people get introduced to jQuery Mobile, they say, data role page, data role header, data role content. That data must be a jQuery Mobile thing, when in fact it's not. That is pure HTML5. And to be more clear about it, data hyphen is the HTML5 part of the equation. Role is what jQuery Mobile brought. So let's make sure we have a very clear distinction about this. It's very common to mistake HTML for XML because they both use those same pointy braces. But in fact, HTML is a markup language, it's a display language, it's a view language. And XML is a pure data language. The reason why they both use pointy braces is because they're both based on SGML, Standard Generalized Markup Language. They both come from a common ancestor who was a big fan of pointy braces, elements, and attributes name value pairs inside of them. But HTML is very different than XML. XML is strongly typed. And what I mean by that is you have to type very strongly on the keyboard in order to use XML. No, that's not what I mean at all. I mean that XML is strongly typed in that you have DTDs and schemas saying this is what it means to be well-formed XML. If you leave out an element, if you leave out an attribute, if you put the elements in the wrong order, that's malformed XML. It's strongly typed. Is that the case with HTML? HTML from the very beginning was meant to be very flexible and very forgiving. That's why you can type your elements in uppercase or lowercase. That's why you can surround your attributes in double quotes or single quotes or no quotes at all. Yeah, I don't recommend doing that. I try to make my HTML be as well formed as my XML. But that is a developer constraint that I am imposing on HTML. That is nothing that HTML is forcing me to do. And nothing divides this more clearly than this data attribute. HTML5 has said you can put whatever attribute you want in there. If you begin it with data hyphen, that is going to validate. You'll pass that through any HTML validator, and it'll say, oh, it's okay. This is a user-specific attribute. So if it begins with data hyphen, the validator doesn't care what you put after the fact. And so in this example, we see data name and data city and data lang and data food equals bacon. And I picked this example because it's completely arbitrary. Someone is going to look at this example and say, oh, that's why I love HTML5. They have a data bacon attribute. Yeah. No, that's not what we should get out of this at all. They have open-ended data attributes that we can use for whatever purpose we want. This wouldn't pass a DTD. This wouldn't pass a schema. But this is completely valid HTML5. So when we start looking at jQuery mobile, you'll see not just data role, although that's the most common one. You can say data role button, but inside of that you could say data corners, true or false, whether you want those corners to be rounded or not. Data icon equals delete, and it'll put a delete icon. Data icon equals info, and it'll put an info icon up. Data icon position, whether you want it to be left, right, top, bottom, any of these kinds of things. jQuery mobile is lousy with all of these data attributes all over the place. And it's because HTML5 allows a framework like jQuery mobile to specify all these various attributes. Does that make sense? That's the most important thing for you to know when it comes to jQuery mobile. So let's start looking at some source code. To begin with, you might have something that looks like this. And I won't write out this full application. We don't have time for that. But let me start with something simple for you right now. Let me come in here and let me create a file called test.html. And let me come in here and let me give it an HTML element. I'll make it big enough for you to be able to read it. So here's HTML. I'll give it a body element. And I'll give it a simple H1 that says, hello, MDS. Yeah? Now I have a web server running right now on port 8000. So if I were to come into this web server right now on port 8000 and view that test.html page, there's nothing impressive about that at all, is there? You just hurt my feelings. No, that's not what I'm trying to prove to you, though. If I come back to my mobile browser and say, show me what this looks like now, test.html, if you squint real hard, you can read it. Yeah. This is because this iPhone has a 960 pixel viewport. Remember, most websites assume a 1024 pixel viewport. An iPhone has a 960 pixel viewport. So you can see what it's trying to do. It's trying to cram that entire web page into a viewport. And what that means is you need a microscope in order to read it. So one of the first things I would recommend you do for all mobile development, not just jQuery mobile, but all mobile development, and there's very few code examples I'll give you that you can blindly copy and paste, but this is one of them right here. You can say, I would like this viewport. I would like its width to be set to the device width. Now let me knock that down just a little bit so we can see it all at once here. Viewport width equals device width. The important thing about this magic code is you can copy and paste that one line into every web page you have. Because for desktop browsers, it's a complete no-op. The desktop browser ignores that completely. There is zero danger in you including that for desktop consumption because the desktop doesn't care about the viewport. But our good friends, the mobile device, does. And so when you say width equals device width, notice I didn't say width equals 347 pixels. Right? 393 pixels, 412 pixels. No. That's the old way of doing things. Responsive web design means we can't, and 4.1-inch screens, and 4.2-inch screens, and 4.3-inch screens. You get the idea, right? Because it's relative, that one line does exactly the right thing. So I can go from something like this, that's very small, to something like this. And all I did was added that one line, that viewport width equals device width. And I did one other thing. This CSS is something else you can copy and paste. Max width equals 100%. What that allows all of your images to do is scale to be as large as their containing div and no larger. So I have an image. Let's come in here right now and let's look at that image right now. And if I take a look at those image dimensions, we can see that's 423 by 250 pixels. That's going to be just a little bit too wide to display comfortably on my iPhone screen. If I come in here right now, I can see that that image fits perfectly on this screen. And yet if I want to see the source for that image, you can see I haven't specified a height or a width. All I've done is included a CSS file that has that instruction in it. Now, if I come in here and comment that out, you're going to see that image gets a little bit fatter. I'm having a hard time scrolling vertically there. All right. You can see it is being cut off there a little bit. And so we could spend all of this session just focusing on responsive web design. But little hints like this, by saying image, the max width is 100% of its container. This is one glimpse into responsive web design, making sure that that image is never any wider than it needs to be. Yeah? Outstanding. Well, I haven't even given you any jQuery mobile yet. And I apologize because that's all the time we have. So I hope you enjoyed yourself. Thank you so much. No, I'm kidding, of course. We got lots of jQuery mobile to give you. So what does this end up looking like? Don't be scared. This is a whole screen full of code. Don't freak out, though. Here's what you have to include. You have to include three things. You have to include the jQuery mobile CSS. You have to include jQuery. And you have to include jQuery mobile. This is something that confuses many people as well. They said, well, which do I need? jQuery or jQuery mobile? The answer is yes. You need both. Because jQuery is what allows you to make AJAX requests. jQuery is what gives you the document ready event. jQuery is what allows you to do DOM selection in there. That's what jQuery brings to the party. jQuery mobile is what gives us all of these things like data role equals page, data role equals header, data role equals content. So in the previous talk, I mentioned there's another library out there called Zepto that is API compatible with jQuery, but it is 4K instead of 140K. And it's because jQuery is trying to work across all desktop browsers, IE and Firefox and Safari and Chrome and all the others. Zepto gives you all the same AJAX and all the same DOM selectors and all the same things like that, but it is targeted at mobile devices. Specifically, it's targeted at WebKit browsers. So if you know you're writing a jQuery mobile app and it's only going to be running on mobile devices, you can swap out 140K of jQuery for 4K of Zepto, and your app will never know the difference. Yeah? I'm going to include jQuery in here, though. So I've got the CSS, jQuery, and jQuery mobile itself. We can see that what my page used to look like. Just a body tag with an H1 and an image inside of it. I have turned around now and wrapped in a div. And I've said this div is now my page. And I could have just left the content in place, but I also wanted to show to you that that page can have headers, and I'm not showing you a footer here, but if I wanted to display copyright information and things like that, I could have data role equals footer in there as well. So as I begin adding more and more pages, I have to say page in air quotes at this point. As I begin adding more and more pages, what's going to happen is I'm going to be adding more and more divs that have the data role of page. Yeah? Good. Good. So the combination of the viewport meta tag and width equals 100% and bringing in jQuery mobile now ends up giving me something that looks like this. Yeah? Excellent. So what can we do next? Well, we can start adding pages and start linking between these pages. So if I wanted to have an about page, I could create a hyperlink for that about page. Now, what would that end up looking like? Well, you're going to be shocked on this one. It's an anchor with an href. Yeah? Links are links are links are links are links. But instead of linking out to an external URL, something that's going to generate a new HTTP request, I'm going to point it to a hash, a named div. And anytime you see those hashes, you know that we're dealing with an ID. So when I have a link that points to hash about, we know that when you click on that link, jQuery mobile is going to hide this div and display this div. We've seen this for quite some time. This is the example I showed you earlier. If we go to Wikipedia, and we could do anything in here. Let's see, let's search on iPhone at this point. So anytime you see kind of a table of contents, and you want to learn about, what software runs on iPhone, you see that hash going up in there. That didn't generate a new HTTP request. It just redirected you to a particular element in there. So if I'm on software and I wanted to go to interface, we can see it took me there. And if I go back, it's sending me not to new HTTP requests, but just to different sections within that page. The only thing Wikipedia isn't doing is showing and hiding those divs. But jQuery Mobile is doing exactly the same thing that Wikipedia is doing. But it's the JavaScript that is showing and hiding that. So if we wanted to see this in action, I can come over here to my source code once again. I'm going to take that out for a moment, just so we can see what this looks like. So there is my link about MDS. And when I click on that, we can see those divs are being shown and hidden. Now, in fact, they are two divs on the same page. So I have a div whose data role is page and ID is home. And I have a div whose data role is page and ID is about. But clearly, this is in the same HTML document. And I have a number of different pages in here. Schedule, Tuesday, Wednesday, speaker. All of these are divs that are in the same app. jQuery Mobile is what handles showing and hiding these divs. Yeah? Good. So I pulled one of those data attributes out of there. Let me turn around and add it back in. You can have plain old links all day long. There's nothing wrong with that. But one of the things I mentioned in my keynote yesterday is a mouse gives you pixel perfect screen addressing. Literally, when you're moving your mouse around on the screen and click, you get an XY coordinate that represents the exact pixels on the screen. These big fat meat sticks that you have on the end of your wrist are far less precise. Now, the beautiful thing is they're far more expressive. We can pinch and stretch and rotate, and we can even get all 5 fingers. I don't know what this event is, but I want to write a mobile app where that does something important. Because I can physically address every finger on the screen and every XY coordinate they're at and figuring out what gestures are going on. But when you have a normal undecorated link, what you're going to end up with is something that's not exactly finger-friendly. And so jQuery Mobile makes it very easy for you to come in here. Let's see, where is that link? There it is. And say, you know what? I want you to take that anchor and I want you to turn it into a button. And one of the ways you could do it is you could use a button element. But a better way you can do it is you can use a jQuery Mobile data role. It will handle all the styling and everything for you. So now, oops, I forgot to save. Let's save that. And now let's come back to my browser. And you can see what that does is that gives you something that is far more finger-friendly than a simple hyperlink. Now, another reason why I wouldn't use an actual button element is because in responsive design, I can say that when my web page is this wide, I want to display that as a text link. But when I get smaller and smaller, when I get narrow enough, I want to convert that to a button. And can you see how simply throwing an attribute on that element would be very easy to do rather than just rewriting the entire element? Now, I showed you a page yesterday. They aren't using jQuery mobile, but they do exactly what I'm talking about. They have links right now that are text-based links. And if I resize this page, once I hit a certain threshold, they give us big, fat, finger-sized targets as opposed to mouse-appropriate targets. So I'm bringing these folks up as an example, not of jQuery mobile, but of responsive web design. And you can see how easy it would be in your app to say, well, if I am this wide, I'll display that about link as a text link. And if I make it this narrow, I will make it a button. Yeah? Now, jQuery mobile doesn't do that for you, but responsive web design would. So if I come in here right now and treat that as a button, we can see I got a nice friendly button out there. And I get a bunch of nice friendly icons as well. So if we come in and start reading the documentation, I know, who would want to do something like that? The documentation, what I like most about the documentation is it was implemented in jQuery mobile. So talk about eating your own dog food. Talk about learning the framework by learning the framework. And this is how it looks on a desktop-sized screen. But as I begin shrinking that down, notice at some point I will hit a threshold where rather than having this green div on one side and these blue divs on the other, a two-column display, they compress it to one level. And eventually, you have something that looks just as good on a mobile device as you do on a desktop browser. Yeah? But if we go in and start looking at all the various buttons, and more specifically, all the various button icons we can have, if you give it a data role of a button and then a data icon of delete, you'll get a delete icon. If you give it an arrow left or an arrow right or up or down, if you give it a plus or a minus or a check or a gear or a refresh or an alert or info, you can see you have a number of different icons. And so once again, I want to remind you that Backbone was really a non-UI focused framework. jQuery mobile is much more interested in look and feel issues. And that's why some people end up combining the two. But what we were able to do is programmatically add a button, not programmatically, semantically, turn this into an info button. And if I wanted to make it a refresh button, I would change that data icon element and the icon changes. Excellent. What else? Well, we can begin affecting transitions. All of this comes from jQuery. So if you're using these jQuery transitions, you got the same ones right here. Notice we added data transition and we can fade or flip or pop or slide or any number of things like that. But we do that once again through semantic attributes on the link. If I want to begin adding toolbars. Now these toolbars, things like schedule and speakers up top, those are links as well, but you can see that stylistically they're very different than that about button down below. They're still hyperlinks, but they have different attributes on them. I'm still doing internal links to schedule and speakers, but notice what I've done. On that div, I've given it a data role of navbar. And jQuery mobile says, oh, nav bars will always be snapped up to the top. There are lots of attributes you can do in that nav bar to make it a right nav bar or a top nav bar or a bottom nav bar. You can have a nav bar in a header like I have right now, and you could have another nav bar in the footer. So these are reusable components that, based on where you place them, do the right thing. Now notice I've got some lists of links in there. Now this list of links has some arrows along the side. I've done nothing but create an unordered list of LIs, but I've given it the data role of list view. And data role of list view renders itself this way. Now, I could alternately have a filtered view. This is the same set of links, but notice what I've done now. I've said this is a list view, but I've added data filter equals true. And this begins to tell you what you get. I have added one attribute, data filter, to that list. But look what it gives me. Here's my schedule that sends me to Tuesday and Wednesday. That's just a simple list view. And let me show you that in code to prove to you that there's nothing up my sleeve, right? Nothing tricky going on here. Here's my schedule, and I've just given it a data role of list view. So if I come in here right now and say Tuesday XXXXX, just want to prove to you that that is exactly what we have going on in there. So all that is an unordered list with a data role of list view inside of it. But if I take that same kind of list and I just say data filter equals true, where'd you go? All right, hold on. Come on back. There we go. When it comes to my speaker list, we can see they're rendered slightly differently. And that one line of code allows me to begin typing, and that list is completely filtered client-side. I can clear it out, and I can say, I want to see all the Simons that spoke here, or I want to see all the Scotts that spoke here. And that's the last example I can leave you with. But hopefully this is the most compelling example, that these are things that we have normally done by hand using JavaScript and CSS. Well, we can continue doing those kinds of things. But if you want that kind of capability by adding a single semantic attribute to this, jQuery mobile is what gives you the search box. jQuery mobile is what's filtering that client side, showing and hiding the individual LIs. jQuery mobile is what's showing and hiding the individual divs. You begin seeing that jQuery mobile is exactly what a framework is. It doesn't bring any capabilities to the party that you couldn't already do by hand. What it means is you don't have to do it by hand. You get all these capabilities out of the box. So that, my friends, is why you should pay attention to something like jQuery mobile. I think this is one of the fastest ways you can begin doing mobile development. Backbone is something you should consider as well, but it's a behind-the-scenes kind of framework. If you want to get started with mobile development, jQuery mobile gives you so many of the look and feel elements, the item elements, that you can put together a very impressive app with very, very little effort. What do you think? Did you enjoy yourself? I did as well. Thank you so much.